Hello again. I'm sitting here with Peter Sheahan, CEO of Karakins Group, one of the smartest business guys that I know. He has worked with Apple, Microsoft, Wells Fargo, Hyundai, among a plethora of other clients to help them turn challenge into opportunity and disruption into growth. And I can't tell you how excited I am to hear from him today. Without further ado, I leave you, Pete.
Thanks, Michael. How's everyone doing? It's super hard to know who I'm exactly talking to or where you are, but that's kind of the beauty of the new COVID-19 virtual world. Let me start my conversation by saying, if I hear one more person tell me they're an expert in managing this crisis, I might stab myself with a pencil. In fact, if I got a roll of toilet paper for everyone that said they knew how to navigate this thing, I'd actually have some toilet paper, which would be a damn good sight further than many of us are at right now. And so here's the deal. We're working with some of the largest companies on the planet. We don't do a lot of work with small to medium businesses. And even in the executive, virtual boardrooms of these organizations, no one really knows exactly how this is going to play out. But there are definitely emerging to the surface some pretty, some reasonable, predictable things that we can think about. And I think they have a big impact on us and the way we make decisions as individual leaders, in many cases in much smaller businesses, that I want to kind of unpack today. So I guess the question is, what are the things that we can assume are probably true? Number one is we are rapidly seeing the disappearance of any belief that this thing's going to turn around quickly. It's almost guaranteed that we'll be in a recession in the second quarter, likely a significant contraction. Like every crisis in the history of the world, strong brands and strong companies do better through the crisis and significantly better after the crisis. And so the way you manage your balance sheet and your P&L and your cash flow, you're an individual, and the way you behave in this period, it's going to have substantial impact on how well you can regain some of the losses that you might absorb during that period. And that point being that the decisions we make now, we know will echo into the future, particularly in a world where people can't go to the toilet anymore without telling 7 of their friends. But I think the other and the final bit that even the most pessimistic board members that we're engaging with right now believe is that this too shall eventually pass. Unlikely to be anytime soon, but it's definitely going to happen. So the question is, what might that look like? Because it really does matter as you start planning and making decisions today, how you think this might play out. So I'm going to really quickly jump to a slide here. If you just give me a second, I'm going to include all the slides here as a handout, or however we do that if you want them. But this is the latest modeling as of 2 days ago from McKinsey around the potential scenarios of how it might play out. They put this in front of 2,000 CEOs of mostly publicly listed companies who have access to incredible data and insight and have a strong sense of demand signals. They know what governments are doing. And 70% of them picked A1 or A3, but about 50% picked A1. And so ain't no one betting on a V return. I know this is meant to be an uplifting and inspiring seminar, but let me tell you, when it comes to this decision making, the truth will set you free. And so we're going to talk about, in that world, what we should do next, right? And really there's 3 categories that I want you considering these remarks. Number one is, what did you do right now? How do you act right now? When I've sat on a couple of the panels today, and there's been just some super useful insights around selling in this environment, I thought the panel that Ryan, my buddy, did on financial management was really valuable. If you didn't get a chance to see that, see if you can get access to the video. I didn't catch the whole talent one, but I know culture was talked about pretty importantly too. But this act now piece around really being sure that you're making good decisions now is going to be critical. We'll spend most of our time there. 2, what plans should you be making now for what it might look like in 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months? Where might those opportunities be? And then, big picture ideas, what might be in the back of your head. We probably won't get to that in 25, 30 minutes, but we'll certainly do what we promised, which is working on the act now stuff, right? So here's the deal. In order to take advantage of a crisis, you actually have to survive it. And that's not being flippant or insensitive to what's going on, but actually just shining a light on just how critical and important it is that we make good decisions in this period. So here's a couple of things that we think are successful practices, remembering that no one really knows exactly how this thing's playing out, right? Number one is that humans matter, or to put that differently, don't be a jerk. I don't know if some of you saw the letter that came out from the CEO of Charter Communications, Thomas Rutledge, I'm not afraid to call him out right now, who refused to shut his physical offices here in Denver, in Colorado, where I'm based, in the middle of March, even though everywhere else was getting shut down, saying that even though they weren't all essential jobs, that it was better done from the office and from home, and really exposing his team to significant risk in that process. And if you did follow the story, you might know that one of the engineers sent him an email and was like, dude, like, all the research tells us we should be in lockdown right now. This is really unnecessary. That poor engineer was fired within 24 hours. So, those sorts of inhumane approaches by people like Charter, I think, are gonna sort of come back to haunt them at some point. Related to that, though, is even your own humanity as you do make difficult decisions. I'm kind of working under the assumption that most of you are business leaders, entrepreneurs, and are in decision-making positions. And if you're not, maybe you could hold to account your own leaders in this regard. But the way that people make these decisions and communicate them is critical. If you haven't checked it out yet, watch Arne Sorensen's video, the CEO of Marriott, who compared the crisis to being worse than 9/11 and the GFC put together for his team. I mean, up to 90% of hotel rooms closed down around the world. He's like fresh out of chemotherapy. He's been battling cancer. He's filming a video with all his hair gone, basically in tears about the impact this is having on his team's life. Compare that from Arne to what we saw from Travis at Bird, who sent one of his lieutenants, who most of the 405 odd people that lost their jobs didn't even know or recognize her voice, and in a videoless, interactiveless Zoom call, and then shut down all their interactions through like, it's not just don't be a jerk, but there is your own behavior here is going to have significant impacts on your business coming out of this. I want to show you a chart of financial returns following the global financial crisis. And just bear in mind, take me a sec to catch up here. Like I said, everything's going to be in the deck if you want it here, guys. But here's what we know. That strong brands, and that includes the reputation coming from the behavior of not just their marketers, and I do think messaging matters right now, but certainly from their CEOs as well, recover 9 times faster and produce more than 300% returns, economic returns over the decade following the global financial crisis. So this is not just a soft and squishy idea. At the end of the day, what we call symbols really do matter. And if you don't know what symbols are, and if you're lucky, management consultant, so you don't have to worry about it, right? But basically, a symbol is something inside an organization that individuals give disproportionate meaning to. Things like where their parking space is. I remember in the global financial crisis, IBM was a very good client of ours, and they found a way to not lay off people in many of their regions all around the world. But in return for that, they cut significant costs, and like people had to bring their own coffee mugs to work. The toilet paper quality was downgraded as they tried to cut everywhere they could. And people literally started bitching about bad coffee, bringing their own coffee cups, and the poor quality toilet paper. Toilet paper seems to be a crisis theme, by the way. But like, instead of focusing on the fact that they kept their job, they focused on this tiny little thing, and they really did blow it out of proportion there. We've seen other ones in transformation. We were working with a big asset management and investment firm, and they were trying to build a culture of trust. And they put open plan offices in, they had open book accounting and management transparency, but for some reason there was a real disconnect between the management and leadership team and the actual team. And they couldn't figure out why. And so we went around and talked to all of these guys, all the team members, and asked them, like, why don't you trust management? What's the disconnect culturally? I know you just had a panel on culture. And they said, well, they obviously don't trust us. And we were like, well, what do you mean they don't trust you? And they're like, well, they've locked the office supply cabinet. And we're like, what? And they're like, yeah, the reason we don't trust management, we're not going on journeys, they're locking the office supply cabinet. They don't trust us, right? This tiny little thing. These people are making $500,000 a year in many cases, are blowing it out of proportion. We take the findings back to the CEO, the head of HR, the CFO, and we're like, all you got to do to solve this problem is open the office supply cabinets. I'd love, if we had more time, I'd tell you the whole story, but long story short, when we opened the cabinets, they stole everything. I mean, literally everything that wasn't screwed down, the staff stole. They stole liquid paper. Like, this is not even that long ago. It's not like it was in the back of the cabinet from when we used to use typewriters or something, crazy stuff. They stole it all. In 2 months, they took 12 months worth of stationery. But interestingly, by the end of the 3rd month, there was more stationery in the cabinets than they started that month with. In other words, once they held the nerve as a management team, eventually the cultural norm shifted and people realized they weren't mucking around, and they generally did and were going to trust them. And so culture shifted. Now, I'm not saying it was just all down to the supply supply cabinet. That would be a ridiculous point to make. But the point I'm getting at is that in organizations, particularly in periods of crises, individuals will give very small things disproportionate meaning. And the behavior of leaders, the way you communicate things, the little things matter. One super quick example from 2 days ago. I was talking to a CEO of a very large supply chain, do a lot of work in the QSR industry in about 40 different countries. And he's putting a message out over video to his whole global organization. And he felt super excited about that. So he's like, well, I'll do it, he's at home, obviously. He's like, I'll do it in my living room. I'll share a bit of my personal life with my team. But he's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. He architected a multi-billion-dollar sale at his previous company, very wealthy guy. And behind him is this lounge room of incredible luxury. And he thought it was this beautiful, nice thing to do. Anyway, by the end of the call and video, people were sending notes going, hey, dude, we live in parts of Southeast Asia where, we don't have anything like that. Maybe pick a different room and a different backdrop. In other words, here he's doing this really great thing and they're blowing something else out of proportion. So one of the things you need to be doing right now is thinking very intentionally about those sorts of things, about what the messages that they will send. There's another area I want to lean into. There's a lot of obsession right now about things like money management and cash burn, and I will make a reference to that here in a minute. But actually, particularly if you've got an organization of any scale, there are some other things that also matter, and they relate to things like capacity. So basic human psychology moves us towards being busy when we can't think of intelligent ways to add value. And as a result of that, we keep standing up projects, running these great little initiatives, thinking they're going to change the world and move the needle. And what ends up happening is you end up with a very busy culture where there's a bunch of people doing a bunch of different stuff. If you are in a senior leadership position, you have a primary job right now beyond just managing cash flow and beyond managing clients, which we'll talk about too. But you have to deselect a bunch of stuff that's happening inside of the business, okay? You cannot have 130 different initiatives still running during a period like this, because you will burn people out, and frankly, they won't be the highest leverage things to do. And you're probably going to change some of those priorities anyway as you put back CapEx or other sorts of decisions and investments you might be making. But please, 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 don't just do money, do capacity. And if you make decisions, as many of you are, hopefully, to keep many of your teams intact, even though there's going to be a pretty strong burn through this period because you want them for the upswing, then make sure you're deploying them on things that are genuinely high value. I had the president of a large events company I was talking to him last week, and we did a little bit of stuff together. And I asked him what he was doing. They do face-to-face events. And I was like, dude, what are you doing with your key design teams? And he's like, look, for most part, we've kept them together, but we're now having them design blended learning experiences, not just face-to-face, because we think that'll likely be one of the transition phases out of this thing. And so capacity management matters as much as cash management does. When it comes to cash management, what you need to understand, I thought the panel that Ryan looked after did a great job of this earlier, is that there's an asymmetric value of cash at different points in a downturn, right? So if let's say your burn rate's 100 grand a month, or 10,000, let's say you're a small business, 10,000 bucks a month, and you can save $5,000 of that. But you don't really need to right now, because in 2 or 3 months, maybe this thing's over. So you don't want to cut some of those, nice to have expenses. Well, if this thing runs 7 months, then you will have burned what potentially could be entire months of runway for that next period of the transition phase. In other words, a dollar saved now is worth substantially more than that dollar saved in 3, 4, 5, or 6 months. And if you really find yourself in a cash crunch, a dollar now will be worth than $1,000 in 6 to 9 months or 12 months, when maybe we've moved through the worst of this stuff. And so I thought the panel said it best earlier, if you didn't see it, which was you should be making very difficult decisions, many of them in partnership with your teams, etc. I know people are volunteering for time down, furloughs, for comp cuts if you're really in that bad a position. But every dollar should be considered, every subscription should be considered, because there is asymmetry between what it's worth now and what it's going to be worth in a little while. So make sure you don't back away from that kind of stuff. For those of you who run larger teams, we're seeing 2 things happen with the leadership team. We're seeing, number one, the establishment of a crisis management team that isn't the senior executive group, although it may have senior executives on it, and that small team that's been set off have permission to make decisions that they would normally need approval to get run. The CEO may well be in that crisis management team, but they are trying to separate leadership from crisis management, because many leaders, while they have to weigh in on the crisis management bit and action and be the front of some decisions that might come from that, they can't just do that. They also need to be thinking around capital allocation, shoring up sources of funding. Where might they make opportunistic investments when the cycle turns and stuff? So we're seeing that. Second thing we're seeing is a significant push of decision-making down the organization all the way to the front face, and really backing our teams, our account managers, our salespeople, our people on the front line if you have physical premises and you're still active in those spaces. So you can shrink the time between demand signal and customer need and the response of the organization. And so don't retain the not particularly entrepreneurs who are usually fairly ego-driven men and women in my experience. You've got to fight the urge to control everything right now, just because you're not in control of the bigger piece, right? And part of how you do that is distributed decision-making rights and responsibilities. All right, final thing on Act Now. Customer intimacy. I was chatting to Adrian Foley, who's the president of Brookfield Properties and Development, a large residential developer, and probably one of the largest actually in North America. And I said, he went through 9/11, he went through the GFC, and I said, what was the big thing you've learned that you won't repeat this time? And he said in both of those times, they stayed close to their customer, but not close enough. They did incredibly well, by the way, in the last 10 years, and they really managed things well on their balance sheet through that period. But he said they sold assets. Now, for them selling assets, for you, that might be letting go a key staff member. That might be dropping an innovation project. It could be, your version of capacity might not be an asset sale thing. It might be who you choose and what you choose to keep and not keep as a priority right now. He said, if we had been listening to our customers, we would have heard that their appetite was turning faster than the news cycle was. And he said, we just weren't quite close enough. And so they are instigating, and so are all the senior teams we're working with right now, are instigating really high touch, high frequency connection with the marketplace, because they want to really understand those demand signals, right? So you push the decision-making down, but everyone at every level should be constantly engaging with those clients as well. So let's move to the second area, and obviously I'm going to move super quick here. I know 4:30 is kind of our drop dead date. Again, all of this content's in the slides for you guys afterwards, but it doesn't matter how well you execute the wrong strategy, all right? And so whilst we are in crisis mode in many cases, we are starting to see, or at least we are with our clients, we're starting to see them kind of come up for air a little bit and beginning to understand what the opportunities might be if they manage this process well, right? And so a couple of little insights into your planning. Number one, and this is a quote I am borrowing from a good friend of mine, a guy called Dr. Peter Fuda, who does quite similar work actually, a lot of work with CEOs and leadership groups. And he says, you're entitled to your own truth, but not to your own facts. And like I said up at the top of this conversation, the amount of opinions that are getting around right now about what it's going to look like and, what news and what side, I mean, you should be debating that shit like crazy right now, and don't assume, have the humility to understand that you're making it up just like everybody else is, but that the value is in the conversation itself. Hopefully some of you saw Anders' presentation yesterday, a futurist talking about scenario planning. I didn't see it, but Anders is an old friend of mine. When it comes to scenario planning in times that are completely unpredictable, the value is not in the scenario so much as it's in the process by which you get to it. And so we should be seeing much more conversations happen much more often with a high level of dissent and debate in them, because it's a moving feast. The only facts are coming, they are coming. We are getting facts every day, but we're not yet piecing the whole thing together. And so the process really matters for this stuff. Related to that, by the way, is you need to have a thing that we call psychological safety amongst your team. If you're pushing decision-making down and you're looking for demand signals and customer insight, then you have to be willing to take the opinions of other people who might be closer to certain things than you are, or maybe just have a fundamentally different set of ideas. And so the thing you want to be doing is, and this is harder digitally than it is in a face-to-face environment, right? In other words, if I'm in a like an 18-person Zoom call or a big market collaboration or something like that, and I can't see that finger move from someone across the table or that eyebrow change, I don't know that they're about to dissent, right? And so I might steamroll that person and not give them the space to contribute and have that dialogue. And so when you are doing your planning and you're doing it virtually and digitally, you have to be, if you're hosting and facilitating that meeting, way more intentional about bringing those insights out of people. Now, with all of that said, by the way, there are in fact a few things that we know and that you can bet on. And so here's like when you start thinking about where the opportunities are, right? I'm going to move through this stuff super quick, right? Number one is we're going to see an acceleration of what we're already seeing around regionalization. You saw that with the tariff war with China. It's going to keep happening, which means local companies here in the US will have strong opportunities to step in and fill problems or solve challenges that weren't previously available to them. But it will be done locally for resilience reasons, et cetera. Related to that, if you're in the supply chain business, the logistics business, the data and analytics business, the primary thing boards are going to be making decisions on right now is what's your enterprise risk management strategy and what's your supply chain resilience. Now, I know for some of you going, dude, I run a much smaller company than that, but I assure you, as you're considering even the smallest, even if you're quite a small operator, I promise you these are going to be in the filters of decision makers in the coming months and weeks, right? We know that digital as a means to remove friction is going to continue and to accelerate. And if you want to check out, by the way, a couple of really good examples of who's doing good work leading into this environment that I think we can learn from, you could look at companies like Nike that really took Amazon head on and did one thing that I don't care if you're a 3-person shop, okay, you can learn from, and that is they built a direct line to their consumer. And instead of relying on distribution partners or instead of relying on, retailers that weren't evolving quickly enough, Nike, not unlike Nestle did with an espresso product 20 years before, went direct with things like the Nike Plus platform. 170 million people are using the Nike Plus platform every single week. And by the way, they buy 3 times more product than a non-Nike Plus platform user does. So if you don't know the Nike Plus story, dive into it and get a sense and get your head around it. One thing we absolutely know is that money will be in motion. There will be a whole bunch of decision makers, managers coming out of this, VPs, SVPs, who have been frustrated with a vendor, but just can't be asked to do anything about it because there's too much going on and we're all making too much money or whatever, we're making too much money. And that money's going to move. Those you watch the RFPs that start exploding in the next 90 to 180 days, right? And so having your capacity and some dry powder for that period, beginning now to work on the story you're going to tell, the value proposition you're going to bring to market. Can you be trusted? Do you have that resilience? Will you be around in 18 months? Parts of how you tell that story. Be ready for that because that money will be in motion and you'll get an opportunity to have a crack at it. One of the things we know, if I just really quickly give you a little access to this image. This is just a crude drawing I did in advance of the call for you guys, but there are actually 2 periods in a downturn historically where you want to bet against consensus, okay? One is in the very early stages, the lagging positivity stage. Our government bet against consensus and probably lost. I think you could argue here in America. We are out of lagging positivity. It's gone. We are absolutely in the reality check. I have agreed with some of the other panelists. I do not think this is, in fact, I would bet you this is not a V-style turnaround. And so it's in the bottom and that early phase of the shift in demand where you want to be in a position to double down and bet hard. But be careful not to be too opportunistic because you've heard all the stories about all the great companies that were founded in recessions, et cetera, and go and burn all your cash right now. That is not a sensible idea. Okay, I think prudence and patience is really important. And I can tell you that's hard to do when you watch the market take a 10% jump in under 14, 15 days. I would be trepidatious if I were you, and I wouldn't be making massive bets right now. I don't think we're in the wait and see part of this cycle yet. Well, we're in the wait and see, but we're not in the early returns to demand. So let me wrap up here. So we're done here by 4:30. I said the final idea was what should you be thinking about right now? So we've talked about what you'd act about. We talked about planning and some of the things you should be able to plan for. And then the final thing is, what should you be thinking about right now? Do not dedicate assets and capacity and resources and money to these things right now. But if you're a leader and you're getting ahead of the curve, you should have this in the back of your mind. And it's a question I learned at a conference It actually it was a private. Actually, I should tell you the story. I got enough time. So about 18 months ago, I was at a very small private face-to-face event in New York, 25 very senior financial services leaders. So, the CEOs of the big banks, insurance companies. There were a couple of speakers, but one of them, the other speaker, was Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon. And he's sitting on a chair and he's being interviewed by a journalist in front of these 25 masters of the universe. And the CEO of one of the biggest banks on the planet puts his hand up to ask Bezos a question. And by the way, this guy hasn't put his hand up in 40 years to ask anyone a question, but he was like, Mr. Bezos, please, sir. He said to Bezos, how do you decide who you're going to disrupt next? And there was a whisper from another CEO on another table who's like, I don't care what he says, just don't say banking. Because you can imagine they're all just waiting for Amazon to come after them. And Bezos responded pretty aggressively to the question. He was like, you guys all sit there and think we're in Seattle in a war room with every industry and a scoreboard with red, yellow, green indicators, and we're just wait until everything goes green and we're coming to get you. And literally, most of these CEOs nodded their head and were like, yeah, that's exactly what we think happens at companies like Amazon. And he went, you're just wrong, you're missing it. The only two questions my senior team asks themselves on any given day, right? Now, bearing in mind, he's big enough that his senior team's not running any of the specific activity, right? He says there's two questions we ask. Number one, where is our customer going? And number two, how do we beat them there? And I think it was the simple best articulation of how to really think in the longer term horizon from a strategic perspective that I've heard. And I think it's what we should be doing now. I think in the back of our mind, start keeping a journal, make a note. Where do you think your customer is going and how can you be there before they get there? And so I think if you take those three chunks of what we're seeing as successful practice right now, you're much more likely to both weather this storm and do well on the other side. So number one, act now, really specific things around cash and capacity and not being a jerk and some real basic stuff. Two, planning. The process matters as much as the outcomes at this point, but there are some things you can absolutely bet on. And I think you're comfortable to start doing that now. And then finally, where's your customer going and how will you beat them there? I'm going to work with Michael and Jessica to make sure you get a copy of the deck. It's got a lot more detail and stuff in it. But hey, fair play for logging on. I hope you got some value out of the last bit. And certainly to the other presenters, you guys did an incredible job from the sessions I saw. So I think, Jessica, back to you, right?
Thank you so much. We're ending on an incredibly high note with that. I didn't want it to be over, and I don't want the conference to be over, actually. That was an incredible 2 days. Thank you so much, first and foremost, to our speakers. You guys are all amazing. It's such a privilege to have worked on this event with you. And reminder to everybody watching, 100% of the proceeds that were raised will go directly to COVID relief. So thank you to everybody for donating your time and sharing your expertise. That was a really worthwhile 2 days. And like Peter said, we will get the recordings of all the sessions out to everybody who's registered. If you're not registered, please add me, Jessa Lux, on LinkedIn or add Click Studios on LinkedIn. We'll be sharing assets there. You're welcome to message me to request those as well. I know we got a ton of people asking how they can get these recordings, so we will get those out. And with that, thank you guys for joining us and have a great rest of your evening.